section. Dave, take it away.
Okay, I'm sharing my screen. Let's I have to get to my PowerPoint though, which is somewhere here. I thought I had it up. There it is. Okay. Let me. Oops, come on. The trouble is I can't grab it and pull it down to get rid of this thing.
Which is what?
See this thing here? It's covering the controller.
Oh.
And I can't grab the hold of. Let's see. Let's see. Not there. I can get it. Okay. Now I can. Okay. Slideshow. Start from beginning. Okay. Now we're going. Before I begin, though, I want to also just saying from what Steve Preston said, we have those situations too where we expect a hit and we don't have any. And I talked about that in my presentation, my first presentation yesterday. Just reiterate that the high RUWE values, which are often the brighter stars and the ones people are more interested in, if that RUWE value is greater than 1.4, you have a good chance of not having an occultation even at the center line, even though statistics say you should. That should be improved with future releases of Gaia data. As they get more and more observations, they improve the stellar data, and those RUWE values then decrease with added observations. The other point I wanted to make for India, concerning the high cost of the IOTA kits for them, I think the first talk today by Eric Olson should be of interest to them.
David Dunham is the one that's actually in charge of the United States IOTA.
Okay, does he have anything to do with RASC?
Well, turn off your phone. Please turn off your.
Yeah.
No.
He's either attacking
Well,
RASC.
Somebody needs to mute.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. Anyway, with the LED flasher, though, is a much less expensive system that you could be replicated in India. So I encourage you to get in touch with Art about that. But anyway, going on to my talk, then the agenda says it's about the rethinking the RASC occultation intersection, but it's not. It's the observer's handbook of the occultations. The occultation section of the observer's handbook is what I meant. And this has for many years been the main way that we've communicated predictions to the general astronomical community, very large community across North America. It's essentially replaced what was called the occultation supplement distributed by Sky and Telescope for many years, and that was produced by the Royal Greenwich Observatory. And Sky and Telescope actually produced this map for the purpose of that supplement, and it's been used ever since, showing the location of the so-called standard stations for total occultation predictions. But and the circles show kind of the areas of validity. The important point, though, is that this is the main way that amateurs in North America get their information about occultations, and so I think we've failed to. I think we could get more people if we could have a better way of portraying the events in the handbook. So I'm going to outline some ideas, and I finally wrote this all up and sent a message to James Edgar, the RASC Observer's Handbook editor, and told him what I thought we should do. And he came back and said, I wholeheartedly agree with you. So we're actually going to try to implement what I'm talking about for the 2020 Observers Handbook. 2022, I mean, yeah. So the other thing is, whenever I finish the information for the next year, I always send a preprint of the handbook information to Sky and Telescope and Astronomy, and then they use it to mention some particular events going on. But I think we need to be more proactive with those magazines to better publicize some of the things that we do. So I'm going to work on that too after we get the handbook material out. So before going to the handbook though, just at the very beginning of this meeting, a message came in from Mike Pretlow, and I noticed he's attending the conference, that there's this 10th magnitude occultation by the trans-Neptunian object Chaos, visible across the western US, kind of at low altitude, but should be observable if conditions are good enough. I know there's a monsoon rain pattern now in Arizona. The path uncertainty, he said in his message, is about 4 path widths or so. So we need people observing across the US, both north and south. I looked, and this event is on neither the Recon website, it's not one of their campaign events or even predicted events, and it's also not in the Lucky Stars predictions. So I think this needs to be checked with David Dunham. Mike Pretlow just used the JPL path for this prediction to see if there's any issue with the asteroid, with this, it's a distant TNO object about 30 AU away, so we need to be careful in the Lucky Star, and Sweary people might know something about this that we don't. But this just shows he had 3 pictures, and then showing the event is occurring at 11:32 UT, and it's here it's about 10.5 magnitude is the predicted magnitude. The asteroid, of course, is much fainter. So estimated max duration 14 seconds and so on. So, but we do encourage observers throughout the Western US to try to make, to watch for this. But let me go on to this is just an outline of my talk about the handbook, showing how we have 17 pages currently for lunar occultations and only 5 pages for planetary asteroidal, whereas IOTA's emphasis these days is about 95% on planetary asteroidal and only maybe 5% on lunar occultations. So it's very unbalanced. But I propose for 2022, we have fewer tables and more maps for at least some of the more interesting events. And so what I've suggested that we shift 3 or 4 pages from the lunar occultation section to the asteroidals. So this would end up with, the lunar occultations take more space, as I'll explain, but we would have fewer of them and more of the other. And the whole idea is to have some maps that people can see and then give web links where they can get even more maps and more information. And we would have a page teaching them how to use Occult Watcher, for instance, so that they can, more observers can see that what's happening and how to get predictions, for their location. Anyway, this is just a brief history. The first complimentary copy that I have of the handbook is from 1988. I think I've had some contributions to it somewhat before that, but this was the first formal one. And at that time, the lunar occultations were handled by the International Lunar Occultation Center in Japan. and the planetary asteroidal occultations by Lowell Observatory. And Bob Millis produced the tables, very, very short tables in those days, just less than 10 events. And Eberhard Riedel and I were doing the lunar grazing occultation subsection of the lunar event, but that was not explicitly mentioned at first, although the tables were there. Then 2 years later, in 1990, the planetaries for the planetary asteroidal, Larry Wasserman took over from Bob Millis. They continued for many years after with essentially the same structure. But finally, in 1992, the gray section was credited to me. And then also in that year, IOTA started to contribute a second longer table of asteroidal occultations to supplement the short Lowell list. For instance, in 92, we had a list of 27 IOTA events versus the Lowell of only 8 events. But that continued for a number of years. In 1999, finally, Eberhard Riedel was explicitly added as the main author of the grazing occultation section. And by the year 2000, the next year, IOTA took over completely the planetary and asteroidal section. And in 2003, ILOC had finally ceased to operate, and the lunar occultation section was solely run by IOTA, and David Harold and I were credited the authors for the total occultation section. So this is what currently looks like. There's a couple of pages of explanation, an introduction, and then there are introductions to the total and grazing occultation subsections, brief introductions. And finally, there's given a list of the names of the occulted stars, the Bayer and Flamsteed designations where they exist for relating to the ZC numbers, which most people aren't familiar with, the zodiacal catalog, which is used for the lunar occultation predictions. And finally, we give a list of double star information on double stars that are occulted during the year. That are in the list. Then we have a long list of total lunar occultations for all those stations. I think there are 18 of them that were shown on that map. The tables giving predictions for, but just the brighter events. You can see it's limited to 6th magnitude and brighter. So these are all easily observed events. And then we have the section on grazing occultations, where we try to be a little more comprehensive. We go down to 7th magnitude, and we have a table of usually around 200 events that Eberhard Riedel produces. And then there's a series of 6 maps. And we have, this is the map for the events coming up in the next couple of months. I point out one event, number 116 here, the path going across central Pennsylvania and farther up into towards Duluth, Minnesota. But this is an occultation that happens tonight. And I sent out a message to observers in Pennsylvania about it. And this is the predicted lunar profile, showing that there's one place where you'll get a whole lot of events. And disappearances and reappearances of the star, but you have to be within about a 200-meter band in order to see that best event. So we have I gave links to a web page where you can get the interactive Google Maps to actually zoom in on that, and this shows a map printed out for central Pennsylvania, showing the path going over Harrisburg and just north of Lancaster. So I know Roxanne Cameron was on at least earlier, so I encourage her after the meeting to maybe see if this might be of interest. It's a 5.9 magnitude star, new Libri, being grazed by the 80% or 69% sunlit moon and 6 degrees on the north cusp, and good high altitude and everything. So, however, the predicted forecast is about 60% cloud, and I noticed it still hasn't cleared up very well here. There will be a total occultation. This is the northern limit, so there will be a total occultation visible from most of the United States, the eastern United States. It occurs before sunset in our west. So anyway, going on to the planetary occultations, we have 2-page introduction and explanation about them currently, and then we have a page giving the so-called table 1, which just references the star numbers for several events and give notes about some of the events, the double stars and different things like that. And then we have 2 pages of tables in which we just list the events, give the detailed information, the position of the star, the identification of the star, whether there are notes about it, and then specify the nominal path in terms of cities that the path passes near. And Derek Bright has been great in going through and figuring out these lists for the cities to put in this list, and I always tweak them a little bit, and then we send it for publication. But how many readers of the handbook are going to take the time to go through this list to try to figure out which event is near them, just from a list? I don't think it's working very well. And this is what I propose to do. It says we're going to keep the introductory explanatory sections, the ZC names, the double star list, and the total occultations the same. The total lists have all of the bright stars. They're all bright stars, and they're things that people can easily see. And the lists are actually more compact, take less space, and allowing more events to be shown than if we tried to replace it with a series of small maps showing each occultation. That way people can see the nearest city and go to that and see what is happening for them tonight or the next nights and so forth. So it is handy for that purpose, and is rather like the other lists in the handbook, which list all the different phenomena that happen in a given month, conjunctions and so forth. But what I propose now is to have only one grays map of only the very brightest star, and a small table just for the brighter events, very similar to what Eberhard Riedel already produces for the JOA. So we do that for the RASC handbook, and then we would give a link to the 6 maps. We'll still have the same 6 maps and approximately 200 events with the tables and so forth, but they'll be available on our website, and we'll give that link. And we have one for 2021 given here, and we'll continue to do that, but that'll free up some space. These pages then will be moved to the asteroidals. And then for them, rather than have those tables, we'll include maps of different types of events with explanations and links to websites which give even more predictions, and of course the description of Occult Watcher, which is what we really want to steer people to use for actually selecting occultations near them. So this is what the new grays map would be like. I would have this has about 30 events, but I propose only showing about the 15 or 20 brightest events, otherwise it becomes too cluttered. And instead of having numbers that people have to go to a table to figure out what they are, we'd actually put the date and the star name on the paths. So that's not too hard to do, especially if you have only 15, 20 events or so. And then we would have the table like this is given in the JOA, which would just tell the percent sunlit moon and things like that. And now for the asteroidal events, we would have a map like this. This is a map showing all of the main belt occultations of stars that are brighter than 9.0 magnitude. And again, I plan to do, label the maps where we just have a few events like this with the date and the asteroid name, and then the table which would give the, just for these events, the asteroid, the duration, the delta magnitude, and some of the other basic information. Probably not the position of the star, though. I'll have people go to the websites to get that. But then they could also link to go to another website where we would have more events, like what Derek Bright already has on there. He has an RASC page where we have the current 72 events or so that we normally have each year. We would still continue to do that and refer people to that. And Derek could have a series of maps like this to show people where those paths are, maybe, like he already has paths like that, path maps, regional maps for the country. Anyway, then for other asteroidal occultations, we'd have separate pages, which would be similar to what I showed for the main belts, one for near-Earth asteroids, one for special main belt asteroids, binaries, barbarians, or other odd shapes. And I encourage people to help me with this project to suggest events or asteroids that would be suitable for these different things. A page dedicated to occultations by Trojan asteroids, with highlighting the Lucy targets and the Lucky Star targets. Produce it. What I need to produce those maps is a set of OCC element files, like Steve Preston produces for all the events. I need to filter them with Trojan asteroids and these other events, and picking up. So I could use some help from the Lucky Star project and maybe Swery to select the TNOs and centaurs for the last page, which of course should be of high interest. That concludes what I have. Are there any comments? Yeah, okay. I'm going to stop sharing now. So.
Okay.